Power Ranger toy gimmicks. Now, it's a good thing and a bad thing. In a lot of ways, it's a good way to refresh the toy line because, you know, in the older days of PR, Super Sentai, you didn't really have that many type of weapons, upgrades, and whatnot. So when they introduced the entire show to a gimmick, a collectible item that would run through various things, it's a good and bad thing at the same time. In one ways, they can add a lot to the story, you know, getting a mid-season upgrade or a special power-up with these items. We get different Zord configurations that we can do because a lot of the aspects of Power Rangers that we enjoy is the combining functions. But then there's also the bad side of these things where the company, well, yeah, it's totally fine for them to make money and have a whole catalog of stuff. There are times where they'll abuse that or overuse it in negative ways. One example of that is in Ninja Steel. Back when Bandai was still producing the toys, they made you buy a Megazord over and over again in order to just get like specific things that you wanted. You wanted the UFO Zord for that add-on for the head for the Ninja Steel Zord, but you couldn't do that. You had to buy a completely full Zord for, you know, full price. Now, you know, gimmicks are not equal. Some gimmicks are really cool. Some gimmicks could really add to a storyline where it could be either emotional, cool factor, and then some gimmicks can just like hit or miss. Some of them are just like, they didn't particularly work with me. I think one that I really didn't care for was the Megaforce cards. Now, as a trading card game, it was pretty cool, but for in-show use, it was really like, it took too long to use, activate, morph, and they didn't really get to do all that much with them. Now, cards can be used in a cool, interesting way, like Kamen Rider Decade, who used a card motif as well, or Kamen Rider Blade, for example, who used scanning cards and other elements to them. Dino Fury's keys. Now, like, granted, the Ranger keys are one of the best things that they came up with for the series, and I'm not saying you can't do Ranger, like, you know, key motif again, because that's what Dino Fury did. It's just that the way they used the Dino Fury keys, they were mainly used as, you know, ability add-ons. So they didn't really have that many uses for suit power-ups or mode changes. So I said to myself, what gimmicks were really cool, interesting, that either gave, like, you know, new abilities to the Megazords, were interesting in the motif on their either morpher or how they were used in fights, or were they a core element to the series in some capacity, whether either in Power Rangers or Super Sentai. So I came up with 5 that I thought were really cool and interesting. And I wanted to start off with the Power Sphere / Shinobi medals from Ninja Storm Hurricaneger. This was like one of the earliest seasons that introduced us to a gimmick, and it came like perfect right off the bat. The Power Sphere system was integral to the Ninja Storm Zords. You had to have the Power Spheres to either form combinations or you got cool weapons or add-ons. Now granted, some of them were extremely difficult to get, some of them were very rare, or they had like alternate versions, different colored variants that were just like only sold in specific countries. So you can get annoyed at that, but they were very unique. Some of them were like, you know, simple as a cloth, a stamp. One was a star, one was a shark, so they had really cool things, and they all had to fit within the sphere, and it also came with the Shinobi Metal / Power Disc that connected to the morphers, so it gave you a little bit of extra, you know, features to the thing. Now, I wish they had given sound effects to the morpher in some capacity, but unfortunately, that was their first go-around with the gimmick, so they really didn't think of adding, you know, support for sound effects. But overall, I thought it was cool because the Megazord toys can hold them inside, and you can just, you know, reenact certain poses and moments with them. And like I said, if you get the Japanese ones specifically, because the US ones really lacked in paint and other things, and we didn't really get the Shinobi medals in the sets. They usually just sold the Power Spheres within a weird odd set like Ninja Con, for example. The next one that I really enjoyed was the head plates from Dino Thunder. Now, this is kind of odd because, again, they didn't really do much, but they did incorporate sound effects for the first time, and they were still relevant to, like, oh, you had to get the Zord, and the head plate came with them. Now, in the US case, you know, they didn't come with them with the Zords. We usually got them with the Morpher in a bundle set. It came with the Brachio Morpher. We got a couple of other ones, and I thought they were a cool design because, you know, when you put the head plates on, it would have a different eyepiece, so the colors would change. And if you had the Dino Commander, the Brachiomorpher, it would give you additional sound effects. And because in Ranger, the Zords talked, so you would actually hear their voices. It was like one of the earliest times where we kind of had like a link between the Zords and the Morpher, because we really didn't do that often. The closest we had was like the Power Coins, which connected to the Zords in some limited capacity. But this was like the first time where we had like, oh, I can control the Zords, or I had like the detail from the Zord's design. And I really liked the designs in general. Now, some of the Zords we didn't get in the US, but then also in Japan, they didn't get the Cyracto Zord, which formed the Mezzodon Megazord, which I always found very strange. Japan got like every type of like combination head plate and design. Some of them were limited editions that were only released in certain countries. Like, for example, there was a silver version of the head plates. It was for a very special thing for the silver releases that can also be used with the shield. So they had extra functions as well, because you can connect it to Triassic shields, so you had those for. It was weird. Japan didn't get the Styractyl head plate, but we didn't get the gold-plated Thundersaurus Morpher for Connor's power-up. It's just like strange today. Like, you would think that Bandai would not release the gold power morpher when Tommy was like the most popular thing of the MMPR days, and it's just like they didn't release the gold power morpher. Like, are they insane? Yeah, those things back then happened. Now, next up, I would obviously have to include the Ranger keys. Probably one, if not the best, gimmick that the series could ever introduce, because it grants the Rangers the ability to transform into any of the past Rangers, including, moving forward, because you can always add Ranger keys in a future season. It was just one of those gimmicks that was nearly 100% perfect. There were a couple of flaws that I didn't like, and I'm not really talking just about like, oh, the US keys are really tiny and not that detailed compared to the Japanese ones. There were a couple of things that I didn't like about them. Like, I'm grateful that they made like virtually all the keys, including additional ones from Kamen Rider, Zords, and other guest appearances from other seasons, like Akiba Ranger, for example. But I did kind of hate that they went lazy in one area, where you would get the sound effects for each of the teams. It would say, Jew Ranger, Jetman, Abba Ranger, but it would never like be specific to like, oh, you put in like Ginga Yellow, and it would say Ginga Yellow, Ginga Green. The US keys had their pluses and negatives. Yeah, I didn't like them for being smaller, but at least their detail was there. And of course, we got a couple of the keys. We got the Titanium Ranger keys, so that was nice of them to include them in that set. And I thought it was a really cool gimmick, not just because of nostalgia. I thought it was a really unique idea. It was like, well, how do we bring all these past Rangers back? Like, you can't realistically do that either in PR or Super Sentai. Just so many actors either unavailable, or it's just something you just can't afford. But you can bring back the suits. So it was a really cool idea for the 35th anniversary in order to just simply swap powers, and it could be a constant thing that you can keep going without too much of a problem story-wise, continuity-wise. One of the particular gimmicks that I really did like was the Dino Charger / batteries, the Judenchi from Kyoryuger, because unlike the Ranger keys, they actually went out of their way to make them so that they actually would say their names, have specific sound effects, and you got them pretty easily. They would usually be in either candy form, or they would come in value packs that come all together. Even in the US version, there was this giant jumbo-sized pack that came with pretty much all of them. And they were more creatively used in the show, where you could remember pretty much all of them, versus like the differences, like I said, with Dino Fury, where like I always forget what the Dino Fury ones do and what powers and whatnot, because it's just not like a substantial change. And also, they are used in Zord combinations and configurations, but they're much more simpler versus like, say, in Dino Charge / Kyoryuger. They were used in the Ultra Zord formation, where they would be plugged into the back of the Titanozord. So it was a cool way to incorporate the toys, and it was a much more easier way to deal with, for example, compared to the engine cells from RPM, which I think is also another perfect gimmick that I thought was really cool. Now, unfortunately, in the U.S. series RPM, the engine cells were pretty useless because, again, while they did function like they worked in the show, in the Japanese version they had all kinds of sound effects, and they were the heart of the toys because, frankly, virtually all the toys had no built-in sound effects. Everything was controlled by these engine souls. And then, of course, they can release specific ones that were for like limited edition lines. Although I will say the engine souls from go-onger slash RPM was kind of that point where they were going too far in the way of forcing you to get certain things. Like I said, there's always that negative aspect of the gimmick because, you know, oh, you want to get Bear RV soul, it's sold with the weapons that usually people don't want. Some of the weapons are not that cool. Like, I like the Concom bar from go-onger, you know, the one that has the railroad crossing signs. Those are cool, but the main weapons from the go-onger slash RPM guys, I didn't really care about their designs. They were way too small. They were never show accurate, and like couldn't really do blues. But yeah, and then sometimes you were forced to get those souls in those sets because you just couldn't get them any other way. But I did really like the engine souls because they would, you know, have all their voice lines. You would click them, and you can kind of, you know, power them and play them even without being in the toy. So if you were just like, you know, bored and you wanted to fiddle with them, you can do that. The only drawback with the engine souls is that they all ran under button cell batteries, and you had like, if you collected every soul, say you collected the common ones that were from just the show, and we're not even talking about the special ones that were limited edition ones like Bumper Soul, you would easily have like 30, 40 of those button cells, and they don't make rechargeable batteries. So you're gonna, if you wanna, you know, keep using them, it's just a pain in the butt in order to, you know, keep them alive. It's the same thing with commemorated doubles memories. They all run on button cells too. It's the exact same problem, and they were also prone to malfunction. A lot of the buttons would fail in particular ways where it would either misfire because the plastic would just not push properly, or the plastic would push but then let go because it wouldn't go all the way, or we had a physical issue with the buttons. So a lot of times things would just not work, and you have to do some creative ways in order to fix that. Still to this day, it's still a pain in the butt to get some of those things to work. But even though we had all these issues with the engine souls, I thought they were really cool, a really cool design, because again, they were the souls of the mecha in go-onger, so they always had some funny lines and whatnot that you can always go back to, and you can always expand on them too as well. It was just one of those systems that you can keep adding on, while other ones that were, like, say, the head plates, you can only do so many because you have to build a Zord with the head plates for Dino Thunder in order to, like, add new ones, versus those, you can just add in additional side ones for weapons or minor things that you can include. I mean, there's a lot of gimmicks in Power Rangers I didn't even mention. They didn't really heavily start doing the whole gimmick thing until Ninja Storm, but even then it wasn't a consistent thing. Like SPD didn't have one, Mystic Force didn't have one. But starting from like RPM and on, pretty much we always had a gimmick in some capacity. And you know, I like the majority of them. I like the hidden discs from Shinkenger. I think Tokuger's one was pretty unique, even though we'll never adapt that season at all in the Power Rangers, but it was like the few times, like I said, we used the Zords to actually, you know, be in use of weapons or the Morpher directly. So again, that has pros and cons. It was a cool concept that we can control the trains with the Morpher, but at the same time, the trains were so tiny in order for them to work in there, the mecha design was just really, really small. What side do I fall on? Do I like a season without a gimmick, or do I like a season with a gimmick? Me personally, I don't really care either way. But I do care if they make a poor gimmick, where it's either overused or it just doesn't click. Sometimes it happens. But I'm not like against a gimmick idea, as long as it's incorporated into the season in some pretty cool way, whether it be a journey of them finding out, like are they good or bad? It could be tied to like things like that. Like Prince Philip, he had to earn his energem and the power to become a Power Ranger. Other times it could be simple. It doesn't have to be like always be a part of the character. It'd be like, oh, we needed something and we needed an upgrade. So like say, you know, Wild Force, Go Ranger, they had the jewels that go inside their swords, and they had to slowly find their Zords that way and unlock them. So I think that was like one of the very earliest times where they had a slight gimmick, but it wasn't like overloaded. Now, what do you guys prefer? Do you like the gimmick, or do you not like a gimmick? Would you prefer to have it like in the days of Lost Galaxy, Lightspeed Rescue? You would get, you know, 5 Megazords / you know, certain weapon upgrades and etc., and that's all you would be. You wouldn't have to like, oh, I have to get this crummy weapon in this set in order to get this one thing that I really want so that I can do a combination with the thing. All of them have their pros and cons. I think it does help the series overall, because I think the main thing is that you can get tired from ranger suits and just, you know, standard battles in a season, because again, you know, the show is 30 years old at this point, so a lot of stuff is like, oh, we're familiar with this, so we're not as like, ooh, ah, all the time. So sometimes you do need a point where you need to refresh something, which makes it more interesting, and I think that's where the good part of the gimmicks come in. So yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.